For listeners who might not know, Dr. Giulia Tercovich, I hope I said that right, is Deputy Director of the Centre for Security, Diplomacy and Strategy and Assistant Professor of European International Politics at the Public University of Brussels. It's okay. So Julia recently co-authored a piece for CSDS titled "When Multilateralism Meets Multi-Alignment: How Can the EU and India Partner in a Fragmenting Global Order?" For further context, Julia and I are talking on the sidelines of the inaugural India EU forum hosted by the Ananta Centre, which comes a week after the European delegation left India and they were in India for Republic Day and to sign the FTA. So, with that context, Julia, I just would like to know, can you set the stage for our listeners? Can you give an essence of what your paper talked about?
I think it's important, now that we are discussing EU-India cooperation, also to understand where Europe stands in terms of Indo-Pacific and its new Indo-Pacific. So 5-6 years ago, the Indo-Pacific was really not at the core of European Union foreign policy. Was considered, an important region, but very distant geographically from our neighborhood, so not necessarily a priority. Things changed completely in the past years. Already starting with China more aggressive stances in foreign policy, but then with the COVID-19 crisis, the realizations that, we were over-dependent from China. And then, in 2021, Europe signed EU strategy for the Indo-Pacific, its first Indo-Pacific strategy, because of all the challenges that were emerging. And then in 2022, we had a Russian invasion of Ukraine that also changed, once again, the way Europe sees the Indo-Pacific region. And on this, I think the big connection is what was mentioned by the Japanese Prime Minister Kishida, that he said, what is happening in Europe can also happen in Asia. So we saw there was really a lot of convergences in the way the two regions and partnering the two regions were seeing these challenges. Even more in Europe, there was this realizations that, we share a lot of values with the Indo-Pacific that at the same time has become the center of technology development, security challenges as well. And we wanted to be there. We wanted to be engaged with that region. And I think overall, these past 5 years really show us, and here I'm going to quote a sentence that a speaker mentioned yesterday during the forum that I think was really spot on. In short, what the recent years show us is that COVID show us that we completely outsource our manufacturing to China. And Ukraine show us that we also outsource our energy to Russia and our security umbrella to the US. So this is the situation in which we are in Europe. So we have all these challenges that we are trying to overcome, and we see the Indo-Pacific region as a region that can actually offer some opportunities in this sense. In terms of what? In terms of managing the risks that we can have as Europe, even if the region is distant, still these challenges can affect us. So what we want to do, we want to reduce our vulnerabilities, we want to diversify our partnership, and overall we want to ensure that Europe retains the capacity to act in a world that is increasing fragmenting, right? So I think these are our priorities. Now, why does India matters in this broader Indo-Pacific strategy? Once again, I think what we share is that this commitment we have to preserving our strategic autonomy, in a world where we have great power competition and more competition again with the two big powers, we would like to protect our autonomy. We would like not to be forced to necessarily choose and keep this freedom. And I think this is something we share in Europe and in India. So we would like to try to build a partnership that allow us to keep this independency, and we recognize this in each other. In addition to that, because of this context, Europe also was really encouraged and really wanted to push these relations between the EU and India that for many years was described as something, full of potential but really underperforming. But because of the context and also because, the work that was done in the past years in terms of building trust and so on, we have now really a momentum to move things forward. So is not necessarily that the potential has changed. The potentials were already there. What has changed is the context and the urgency that now we have to implement something concrete. And once again, why do we want to have something concrete? Because we want to reduce our dependencies from Chinese manufacturing. We want to avoid vulnerabilities in critical technologies. And we also have uncertainties in terms of our own security. So we want to talk with other partners to see how they see the evolution. So in the recent, as you mentioned, in the recent months and in the past year, there's been a lot of movement on that front. So in early 2025, there was a high-level European Commission visit here in Delhi. I think that's what kickstarts President von der Leyen really wanted to show her commitment to India, and that's how things start moving very fast. So there was a joint communication on a new strategic EU-India agenda that was also published. And then we have now the signature of the FTA, the signature of the security and defense partnership that, as you said, happened recently. This is not just diplomatic symbolism. This is really showing that there is an interest. Now, the question and the challenge is, how do we move from this momentum to something concrete, actually? And I think the forum was really instrumental in that sense, because we had very, concrete ideas on how things can be moved forward.
The argument you're laying down about the natural interest of Europe, the continent, and European Union, the entity in the Indo-Pacific, it's a sentiment echoed by so many leaders that have recently visited India. I believe Chancellor Merz of Germany was here a couple of weeks ago, who also mentioned India to be a pivotal partner in the Indo-Pacific. And I'm not sure from exactly where, but I do recall a statement I heard from the Indian Foreign Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, who said Europe now perceives stakes in the Indo-Pacific, which is a welcomed concept for us in Delhi. Now, if I take that a little bit forward, if we are to treat the Indo-Pacific as a key theater for the European Union, how do we envision that? Like, you laid out the intent and you laid out the reasons why the continent must diversify. But what does that actually look like? Will the EU be a net security provider? Perhaps take on a soft version of the role the United States played as a security guarantor? Or are we thinking about something more collaborative? Are we trying to build it block by block? How do we go?
So first of all, the fact that we recognize those challenges, and not just as a regional challenges, we recognize this potential crisis as crisis that can have a direct impact on Europe. That's already an important step, right? We recognize that a crisis in the Indo-Pacific region will have an economic impact and potentially a security impact on Europe. This is important because this means it's our direct interest to avoid a crisis to happen. So discussions are going in that sense, are going in the sense of what can Europe do to prevent crisis in the region. And these discussions about, the partnerships and how to encourage this partnership is part of that as well. It's like, tell us how we can help you, right? How can we help you to preserve some forms of order in the region, to avoid the situation to become critical, because we recognize that even if we are far away, this is going to have an impact on us. So, for example, on some of the crises, what Europe is trying to do is really try to signal its position and trying to say, look, we're going to act. And Europe has instruments to act, from sanctions, as Ukraine shows. So we can do things. But where we are at the moment is we are trying to signal that we are engaged. We are engaged with the regions because we see the region as a priority region for us. And in that sense, that's in one direction. The other direction is all the potential cooperation that we will do from defense industry's point of view, which was discussed quite a lot also these days. There is a lot that can be done to find ways to collaborate more, and once again try to avoid this crisis to happen, which I think is everybody's interest, right?
Should we expect increased engagement in the region from European Union, the entity, or are we expecting that to go hand in hand with certain countries from Europe also individually increasing their footprint? And if so, which countries should we look forward to?
For India, the main entry point in Europe has been the United Kingdom, right? It's traditionally was part of the, but since Brexit, this changed. So let's say the reflection is still to focus, on the bilateral relations. But the FTA, for example, showed that the Commission can have, quite some leverage in terms of the things that Europe can do. Europe is often perceived as someone like an entity that is very slow, it's very legalistic, that cannot do stuff, that is very bureaucratic, and sometimes it is. I mean, there are challenges there, but Europe can do things, and I think once again the FTA is a demonstration that Europe can move fast if the urgency is perceived. Now, how to go about it? This is gonna take a lot of time. I think where we are now is at the phase of there is an interest, there is a potential, and once again we saw it at the forum, and once again congratulations of assembling such a great group of the people that will need to implement these issues. And it will be at the first phase really in terms of, trust building and what can we do together and where are the challenges that we see in terms of implementing these strategies. And in that sense, I think the core and what Europe is also going to push is for a discussion that will, involve the private sector in these debates, because that's the only way in which we can really understand where the challenges of implementing all these documents that are great, but where the challenges really are, right, in terms of the interest from the private sector that at the end of the day will need to deliver on many of these fronts.
You mentioned crises that can have an impact on Europe in regards to the Indo-Pacific, but of course we all know that there are certain crises that have a direct impact on Europe that have permeated into the diplomatic conversations between Europe and India the last 4 years, that being Ukraine. As we move forward and build more momentum in the relations between EU and India, and of course the FTA provides great momentum, how do you see this going forward? How do you build a partnership that accepts divergence?
I think we are at a level of maturity in our partnership and in our discussion that recognize that we cannot agree and we cannot see everything in the same way, which I think it's a very healthy approach to things. Of course, for us, Russia represents a top problem, right? A top it's providing the main risk for Europe. We see what's going on in Ukraine. I think where we are now is that we understand that maybe it's not India priority for a multitude of reasons, historical and so on. So I think where we are now is at the stage of there are multiple challenges and we all have our challenges. Of course, we also have our priorities. For us, Russia remain a priority risk. You have other priority risk. And I think the level of maturity we have in terms of our discussion is that this is not agreeing on which part is more problematic is not the core. Here the core is really like to see there are challenges that are systemic, that are problematic for both of us in terms of our autonomy once again. So we want to address those issues and we recognize both, and I think that's the point of convergence. We recognize that the best way to solve these issues, the issue that you prioritize, the issue that we prioritize, the best way is just to try to partners as much as possible. And once again, now that all these discussions are starting, it's also going to be a lot of discussions and opportunities for us to explain why we consider, certain risk a priority and why you consider other risk a priorities. There is still a lot, I feel, that needs to be exchanged, and explained and discussed. And I think all these recent development will also allow for more dialogue in that sense.
Can I turn our attention back to the FTA for a quick second, though? Beyond our divergent security risks, which are a matter of geography more than anything else, there are certain differences in the European Union and India in terms of perception and what we prioritize as we're building. India, as a developing country, prioritizes, let's say, resources that and procuring those resources in a diversified manner that supports our growth strategy. At the same time, European Union as a developed entity has become the paragon for certain values. The values could be sustainability. The values could be, let's say, privacy, as it's outlined in the GDPR. Some have argued that those values result in excessive regulatory assertiveness, but the values are what they are and they do set a benchmark for the rest of the world. Is there a workable compromise model in which the union's credibility can be maintained in how they approach these values, while they also simultaneously deepen their relationships with India and try to deliver from the FTA?
I hope, we'll find a way to overcome this challenge. This is one of the challenge. I mean, let's be honest. It's not that now that we have, signed an FTA or signed a security and defense partnership that is going to be, an easy ride. No, I mean, there will be a need to discuss a lot of things. There are a lot of things that still remain, on the table that we will need to work out. But I think, once again, what we have now is really momentum of trying to solve this issue and trying to find, ways to understand each other. For us, these are not just rules that we want to set because we enjoy having rules. These are rules that represent what we believe are important things, right? Again, being sustainability, being GDPR, regulations, data, and all that. Again, we set these standards because for us these are things that are important. So I hope the momentum will be also reflected in having, again, more dialogue on these issues, why this is important for us. Let's also not forget that there is really a lot of misinterpretation very often in terms of what some of these regulations really represent and why they are there, and they are not to make everyone's life difficult. They are there because on certain things we believe it's important to have rules. But once again, the opportunity we have now is to explain ourselves better and try to also get feedback from others, as it should be, on why certain things makes the cooperation overcomplicated, and see if we can find a way in between to solve these issues. Once again, signing a document is not the end of the challenges, right? But it's a good commitment to say, okay, we are committed to overcome and find solution and at least understand each other more on these challenges.
For sure. If I have to conclude what you just said, it would be to not let things get overcomplicated, especially at the start.
I think this is what also slowed down the cooperation for many years, right? And as I said at the beginning, now we see an acceleration because of the context we are living in. So we need to make sure going forward that the challenges that we had internally, that are the ones you just mentioned, are not going to slow us down, because the context will remain the same, will remain a very challenging context. So we need to overcome some of these internal challenges, misunderstandings, exactly because we have different priorities now, which is this external context that remain quite challenges for both of us in different ways, though.
Have you ever been to Delhi before?
This is my second time,
Nice.
but once again, a very short visit. So I hope one day I'll be able to stay more than 2 nights.
We hope to have you back. But if you could, what interests you about Delhi? What are your first impressions? Have you done a good job in leaving a good impression of us?
I think we also have our flagship event, the Brussels Indo-Pacific Dialogue. So I know how hard it is to, to pull out something at this level. And I think you managed that in a very short time, but at the very right moment. And I think, people who will listen to this podcast couldn't see the level that was in the room, but you really provided the perfect opportunity for the key stakeholders to network, to meet, to start having these discussions, again, from the private sector to people working in the policies, also for academics. We had very, very interesting discussions. So I didn't so much of Delhi, which is a big regret I have, but I truly enjoyed the discussions and I learned a lot from those discussions in that sense. So thanks again for providing the opportunity to come in here. Once again, thanks for hosting me.
Thanks, Giulia. That was lovely.
Thank you.